When she said she had to attend the company couple's dinner, something inside me whispered that there was more than just corporate courtesy in that carefully rehearsed excuse, but I chose to ignore it. I chose to believe that the cold smile she gave me before leaving was just tiredness from a long week, that her eyes avoiding mine were a sign of haste and not guilt, so I stayed home, alone, sitting in the living room armchair, looking at the clock as if every second was torture that reminded me that she was out there with another man, trying to convince herself that there was still a way back, but I didn't know, I had no proof, just that tightness in my chest, that lump in my throat that told me that something was about to break my heart. So I grabbed the car keys, took a deep breath and drove through the dark streets, following every clue that my sick imagination gave me, until I parked a few blocks away from the restaurant and walked slowly, praying that I was wrong. But when I crossed the street and looked through the lit window of the bistro, there they were, sitting across from me. Laughing softly, hands almost touching on the table as if they were longtime lovers, and it was at that exact moment that my world stopped, because before I could blink, I saw his face slowly lean up until he found his lips in a soft kiss, full of intimacy, and I felt as if a dagger was piercing my chest, cutting off every good memory we had together. I walked home in silence, each step echoing like hammer blows in my head. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely unlock the door. I threw myself on the couch, held my face between my hands and cried until I had no more strength left. Each tear was like acid burning my soul, remembering every promise of eternal love she made, every smile that I thought was only mine, and then, between sobs, I understood that something inside me had died that night, something that could never be resurrected. I got up with determination, packed my bags while memories of our life together haunted me like ghosts in every corner of the house. The sound of the zipper closing my luggage echoed like the sound of the end. I took the photos of the wedding, the trips, the birthdays, everything that had once been a symbol of happiness and that was now just proof of a well-told lie, and threw them inside a box that I left on the bed like a macabre memorial of what we had been. When I slammed the door for the last time, I swore to myself that I would never come back, that I deserved something better, that I would no longer be the man who forgives everything so as not to be alone, that I would not accept crumbs of love from someone who did not know how to value me. I left the house feeling the cold wind of dawn cut my face like blades, but also remembering that I was still alive, that my heart still beat, even if shattered. I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, reliving every moment in which I believed I was loved, every word spoken in a sweet tone that now sounded like poison, and I wondered at what moment everything began to fall apart, when I stopped being the love of her life and became just a hindrance in her search for new things. On what lonely night she decided she needed another man to feel alive, and why the hell was I never enough? Why all my effort to be a good husband, partner, confidant, family man, was so easily thrown in the trash on a whim? The pain was so deep that at several moments I thought about giving up on everything, but something inside me insisted that I shouldn't be the eternal victim of this story, that I deserved to start over, that life couldn't end at the feet of someone who didn't know how to love me. And so I started picking up the pieces of my pride, trying to understand where I went wrong, but also seeing clearly that nothing justified such a cold betrayal. I started making plans in silence, thinking about a future in which my smile would no longer depend on her, in which my days would have meaning even without her good morning messages, and little by little the pain gave way to a strength I didn't even know I had, as if each tear that fell made me lighter to run after a happiness that I would never find with the person who hurt me. Months later, as I tried to find myself again, as I relearned how to laugh without fear, I discovered that she had been asking for me, that she had knocked on doors of acquaintances, sent messages that I never answered, that she had returned to the house where we lived to find only silence and absence, and that in her eyes there was now regret, despair, guilt, that the man she had left me for had already moved on or simply left her without explanation, and that she was finally realizing the size of the mistake she had made. But there was no more time, because my heart was no longer hers, because I no longer loved her like I used to, because at some point in my healing process I understood that loving yourself was more important than waiting for someone who didn't know how to hold my hand. I heard from close friends that she spent nights crying alone, that she regretted it bitterly, that she told everyone that she loved me and that it had been the biggest foolishness of her life to believe that she could find something better than what we had, but her words were now like wind, because they no longer had the power to bend me, and the man I was before the betrayal had died along with that cold night when I saw her kiss another man, and in his place was born someone stronger. Someone who learned that love cannot be begged for, that trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, someone who understood that forgiveness is freedom, but that sometimes moving on means never looking back. Today, when I look back at everything I've experienced, I feel a mix of pain and pride, because even though I was broken into 1,000 pieces, I managed to rebuild myself, rebuild my life, find new reasons to smile, and while she carries the weight of regret, I walk lighter, without chains holding me back to memories that only hurt me, but something still intrigues me, something that makes me think every night before I go to sleep. If I had answered her messages the first time she tried to reach me, if I had allowed her tears to convince me, would our story have had a different ending? Or could it be that, inevitably, the betrayal had already planted a seed in us that was impossible to pull out? Welcome to the channel where we never support any form of cheating. Here, we believe that loyalty is the basis of any relationship. The stories you're about to hear are completely fictional, created to show how infidelity can devastate lives and destroy hearts. Get ready, because now begins an intense and shocking story. Enjoy the story and hold on tight, you're about to experience emotions that will shake you to your core. In a house with a simple facade, but carefully decorated with flowers on the porch and always impeccable white curtains, lived Lucas and Emily, a couple who for everyone around them represented the perfect example of love, complicity and partnership. He, a 35-year-old man with an easy smile and serene gaze, worked as a financial analyst at a small consultancy, dedicating his mornings and afternoons to spreadsheets, reports and meetings that told him little about life, but which guaranteed comfort and stability for his home. Emily, 2 years younger, had a presence as striking as her jasmine perfume, an elegant woman, careful with her words and with a posture that, at first glance, conveyed balance and confidence, a literature teacher at a local school, passionate about classic novels and poetry, always ready to move her students with stories that made hearts sigh and eyes fill with tears. They met while still in college, in a crowded cafe in the city center, when Lucas, nervous about his final exams, accidentally bumped into her notebook, spilling coffee over his notes, and she, instead of getting angry, smiled, said that accidents like that are the work of fate and offered her a napkin, a simple gesture that, without them knowing, sealed the beginning of a long and intense story together. Over time, they developed a routine that many envied. They woke up early to walk in the park on Saturdays, exchanged messages during work hours to wish each other luck in meetings or important classes, reserved Friday nights for marathons of old movies, and on Sundays, they welcomed friends for long lunches filled with laughter and memories. The house was a reflection of this love, walls decorated with paintings painted by Emily, shelves full of books by authors ranging from Jane Austen to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, plants scattered throughout every room that Lucas made a point of watering every day, as if each green leaf were living proof of the care he had for his home and his wife. The garden was a special place for both of them, where they would spend hours in the late afternoons, sitting side by side on a white-painted wooden bench, talking about dreams, travel plans, and the family they wanted to start one day, even though the hustle and bustle of everyday life had not yet left room for that. Lucas was a man of simple but meaningful habits. He liked to make Emily coffee before she woke up, he wrote little poems on post-its and stuck them on the bathroom mirror, he sent her flowers on random dates just to see her smile. In contrast, Emily had the ability to turn any ordinary night into something special, an impromptu candlelit dinner, a playlist with songs that told her story, or a surprise in his inbox with short videos declaring her love. To outsiders, they were inseparable, soulmates, people destined to grow old together while collecting happy memories, and the harmony between them seemed so natural that no one dared to question if there was anything wrong. Between them, there was also that almost palpable chemistry, a connection that was revealed in silent glances that said more than any words, in subtle touches during dinner with friends, in lingering kisses before bed, in laughter that echoed through the house on Saturday mornings when they playfully fought over whose turn it was to use the bathroom first. This intimacy, built with patience and dedication, was what made many believe that nothing could shake that union that withstood bad days, periods of extreme fatigue, and common disagreements between two people who were so different, but who, together, completed each other like pieces of a puzzle carefully assembled over the years. The environment in which they lived reflected this complicity. The kitchen, always tidy, was the setting for culinary experiments that brought together laughter and dishes that were not always tasty, but full of affection. The living room, with a comfortable sofa and colorful pillows, was the stage for conversations about the future and discussions about books and films, while the couple's bedroom was a sanctuary of comfort, with soft sheets, curtains that danced in the wind and photos that immortalized trips, birthdays and spontaneous moments that captured the most precious things they had. Even when routine threatened to cool their passion, Lucas and Emily knew how to rekindle the flame. They planned short getaways to nearby cities, explored hidden cafes on quiet streets, exchanged handwritten letters with words that warmed the heart and made them miss each other, even when they were only apart for a day. Among their friends, they were the couple everyone went to for relationship advice, as no one doubted the love they felt for each other. When they got together, they were always the last to leave, as they liked to spend the nights talking about everything and nothing, laughing about stories from the past, discussing ideas about movies or series they watched together, and even making plans for community events, as they both took pride in participating in fundraising campaigns for needy families and reading projects for children in neighboring neighborhoods. This passion for helping others brought them even closer together, strengthened their mutual admiration and fueled the image of the perfect couple that they had built without realizing it. There were, however, times when Emily seemed more distant, like when she spent hours focused on her cell phone under the pretext of correcting tests or answering urgent emails, or when she said she was exhausted and went to bed early, leaving Lucas with the uncomfortable feeling that something was changing between them. Still, he tried not to let insecurities grow in his mind, because he trusted in the love they saw reflected in each other's eyes. Lucas was patient, understanding, the kind of man who preferred to believe that everything would be resolved with dialogue, that any disagreement could be resolved with a sincere conversation by the light of the bedroom lamp, while he held her hand until sleep came. Emily, on the other hand, showed signs of restlessness that few noticed. Sometimes she would fall silent during walks that used to be joyful, or she would skip out on activities that she used to love, like improvised karaoke nights or visits to art exhibitions. Her smile, which used to come easily, became increasingly rare on certain days, replaced by lost looks that seemed to wander through distant thoughts, as if she were searching for answers that she did not want to share. When questioned, she would only say that she was stressed with work, that there were deadlines, endless meetings, demands that left her exhausted and without patience even for the small gestures of affection that she used to make a point of keeping alive between them. Still, when they were together in moments that seemed to restore harmony, everything went back to the way it was before, the long hugs, the exchange of confidences during quiet dinners, the complicity that made them laugh at inside jokes that only the two of them understood, as if it were impossible for any crisis to infiltrate that relationship that, for both of them, still carried echoes of passion and companionship. In those moments, Lucas felt that any doubt was the result of his tired mind, that there was no room for distrust between two people who built everything based on affection and respect, and Emily, even in silence, seemed to be trying to keep alive the flame of a love that, some days, weighed down as if it were made of obligations and no longer of choices. At work, Lucas was recognized as someone focused and dedicated, admired by his colleagues for the balanced way he conducted delicate negotiations and his infinite patience with deadlines and goals that changed every week. Many didn't know, but it was this serenity that he took home, trying to be a safe haven for Emily, even though she didn't always seem to need or want this support. At school, she was adored by her students, who saw her as an inspiration, a teacher who made literature come to life in the classroom, who brought classic characters to their reality with passionate words, and who transformed lessons into reflections that went far beyond the curriculum, earning not only respect, but true affection from those who learned from her. At night, after tiring days, there was the sacred ritual of dinner at the table, even if simple, shared dishes, glasses toasting small victories of everyday life, knowing looks that reminded them that, despite the setbacks, there was still affection. It was in these moments that Lucas would get lost in her eyes, convinced that everything would be okay, that any distance was just a phase, that their love was strong enough to withstand any storm. Emily, in turn, varied between smiles that warmed his heart and silences that weighed like stones, but still kept the routine alive, as if she also wanted to believe that they were okay, that the cracks were nothing more than small flaws that could be fixed with time. When they went out together, the scene changed completely. They were the couple who walked hand in hand through the illuminated streets, who shared desserts in charming restaurants, who exchanged carefree kisses while waiting for the movie to start at the cinema, creating an image of happiness that anyone would swear was true. Close friends said that the two were proof that true love existed, that it was possible to keep passion alive even after years, that respect and companionship could walk side by side without losing the lightness that makes any relationship flourish. And perhaps that was exactly what made everything even more delicate, because behind the closed curtains, on nights when silence reigned, certainties became more fragile, and each side carried questions that neither of them had the courage to ask. Emily began to show subtle changes in her habits, so discreet that only those who knew her intimately could notice them, and Lucas, absorbed in the routine, took a while to put together the pieces of the puzzle that was forming before him, because even when she exchanged smiles for blank looks or when her answers became monosyllabic, he attributed it to the pressure of work and the long hours she said she spent correcting tests or preparing special classes. Emily's phone, previously left on the table in the living room or forgotten in the bedroom, began to accompany her even to the bathroom, as if connecting to the device was more important than any conversation with her husband who was anxiously waiting to share the end of the day. The outings they used to go on together gave way to excuses about unpostponable commitments with schoolmates, meetings outside of office hours or corporate dinners that went on until the wee hours, justifications that Lucas accepted reluctantly, but still trusted, as he preferred to hold on to the memory of the passionate woman who had conquered him years before than to face the painful possibility that something had changed between them. On the nights when she said she had meetings, Lucas would take advantage of the silence in the house to prepare surprises that she never seemed to have time for, simple dinners, but prepared with care, carefully chosen soundtracks to accompany moments he wanted to relive, candles lit in strategic places to create a romantic atmosphere that, in his mind, would bring back the days when the two of them would lose themselves in each other amid conversations and affection. However, the key turning in the lock later and later, her face coming through the door carrying tiredness and impatience, the cold kisses on her face that were once exchanged with passion, all of this slowly eroded Lucas's certainties, but even so, he tried not to let fear dominate his heart. There were nights when he would find himself staring at the ceiling, wondering if, at some point, he had stopped being the man of Emily's dreams, if the small flaws of everyday life had accumulated to the point of pushing her away without him realizing it. Emily, in turn, felt torn between the weight of an affection that no longer filled her like it used to and the adrenaline of something new that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was a different sparkle in her eyes when she was away from home, a smile that appeared when she read messages that arrived at suspicious times, and a rush to leave whenever her phone vibrated with notifications that Lucas never got to see, as she found subtle ways to hide them or retreat to her room under the pretext of needing to concentrate to finish school reports. The man who had entered her life unexpectedly reminded her of the times when everything seemed light, when she fell in love with the words exchanged in secret, the quick touches that caused shivers, the promises whispered in deserted hallways, and although part of her still clung to the memories of her wedding, another part longed for the excitement that she only found in the furtive encounters that had become more frequent. As the weeks went by, Lucas began to notice contradictions in his stories, schedules that didn't match, messages answered in a hurry, carefully chosen clothes for meetings that were supposedly with work colleagues, new perfumes that didn't match the routine of someone who came home claiming to have spent hours in a stuffy meeting room. Even so, whenever fear threatened to take over his mind, he remembered the years of companionship and how much they had built together, and decided to trust once more, telling himself that it was unfair to doubt someone who, one day, was capable of abandoning everything to experience a great love by his side. Close friends began to notice that Lucas seemed more distant, quieter in casual encounters, that he smiled less and got lost in thought when everyone was having fun, but none of them dared to ask what was wrong, because the image of the perfect couple they had built was so solid that it seemed impossible to shake. Emily, on the other hand, was experiencing growing anxiety. Each new message that arrived on her cell phone made her heart race, not only with excitement, but also with fear that Lucas might see it, that the house of cards she was building would collapse before she even knew what she really wanted, if she was willing to give up the husband who had always supported her, the home they had built together, everything they had shared over the years to follow a desire that could only be fleeting. Some nights, when she watched him sleep, she felt her chest tighten with the guilt that silently consumed her, because she saw in him the same man who had won her over with his sweetness, who had made her feel safe when the world seemed to be falling apart, who had reminded her daily, with small gestures, how much she was loved. But these memories were not strong enough to suffocate the flame that was growing inside her, fueled by clandestine encounters, quick kisses in poorly lit parking lots, and words that made her believe she deserved more than the life she was leading. The atmosphere between them became increasingly tense, trivial conversations turned into arguments about insignificant matters, prolonged silences became normal during dinner, glances that had previously been full of complicity began to avoid each other, as if each one carried too many secrets to sustain the old intimacy. The mornings, which were marked by lazy hugs and goodbye kisses, became rushed, with Emily leaving before Lucas even woke up completely, and the nights, which used to be filled with conversations about the day, became long and lonely, with him waiting for her until he fell asleep on the couch, lulled by TV shows that he watched without paying attention. Even so, Lucas tried to keep hope, preparing special dinners on dates that had meaning for both of them, organizing surprises to remind her of how much they loved each other, but Emily seemed increasingly distant, as if these attempts only bothered her. The weekends, which used to be filled with activities they did together, became a source of frustration for Lucas, because Emily would make unavoidable commitments, meetings with friends he had never met or educational seminars that always came up at the last minute, leaving him alone at home, wandering through the rooms with the feeling that the walls held secrets he couldn't decipher. Even the photos they had taken together began to slowly disappear from her social media, and when he questioned her, she told him that she wanted to maintain privacy and that it was no longer necessary to expose so much of his personal life, words that hurt like knives, but that he swallowed in silence, convinced that the mistake must be his, that perhaps he was no longer interesting, that he wasn't trying hard enough to keep her happy. On a Friday night, Lucas prepared a romantic dinner, relit candles that had not been used for a long time, and waited patiently until the clock struck almost midnight, but Emily did not return. His heart sank at the delay and he finally decided to call her, but her cell phone was off. Anguish and despair mixed together as he mentally searched for all the possibilities that could justify this silence. When, in the middle of the night, he heard the sound of the key in the lock, he got up quickly, his heart racing, and saw Emily come through the door with disheveled hair and a strong perfume that he did not recognize, trying to avoid his gaze as she threw her bag on the couch and said in a low voice that she needed to shower before they could talk. Her words echoed in his mind like a sentence, and at that moment he felt something break inside him, because the coldness of her attitude and the distance in her gaze confirmed the worst fears that he was reluctant to admit. The next day, while she hurriedly drank coffee, Lucas tried to talk, but Emily dodged every question, as if afraid that her words would reveal more than her body already revealed. The tension between them reached an unbearable level when he suggested that they spend the day together, only to hear her say that she had urgent commitments and that she could not postpone anything she had planned, her hands shaking as she held the cup and her eyes avoiding his as if they were burning. It was at that moment that Lucas decided to take action. He needed to know the truth. He needed to understand what was destroying what they had spent years building, and so, without thinking twice, he followed her discreetly that Saturday, feeling his stomach churn with every kilometer he walked, his mind tormented by possibilities that intertwined with dark thoughts. When he parked the car at a safe distance and saw her enter a cozy restaurant, his heart was already beating so hard it felt like it wanted to rip out of his chest, and with each step he took towards the illuminated window, his hands sweated and his legs trembled, as if his entire body wanted to prevent him from discovering what he was about to see. And then, there, amid the sound of cutlery and suppressed laughter, he saw Emily sitting across from another man, so close to him that their knees almost touched under the table, the two exchanging glances that left no doubt about the intimacy they shared. The sweet words that came out of her mouth, the smiles she offered effortlessly, all of that was like knives cutting through every happy memory that Lucas kept, and in that moment, there was no more room for denial. The betrayal that he had feared so much was now materializing before his eyes, shattering what was left of his heart while a deafening silence fell upon his soul, paving the way for even more devastating revelations that were to come. The moment Lucas entered the house, still numb from the images he had witnessed, seemed to envelop the room in a thick fog of pain and disbelief, each step echoing as if he were walking on shards of glass, as if every inch of the floor reminded him that this house was no longer his home, but a theater of carefully staged lies. Emily was waiting for him, sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in a robe that gave off a strong perfume, different from the one she usually wore, as if even her essence had changed to someone other than him, her red eyes revealing that she had been crying before he arrived, but now fixed on him with the coldness of someone who was about to make definitive decisions. When he opened his mouth, his voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible, but loaded with all the weight that crushed his chest, asking where exactly it was that they got lost, at what bend in the road they stopped being themselves, but Emily just lowered her head, taking a deep breath before saying that she needed to tell something that she had been hiding for a long time, something that would destroy any hope of reconciliation once and for all, but that could no longer be kept silent. The tension that hung between them seemed to make the air unbreathable, and Lucas, standing at the bedroom door, fought the urge to run away, to flee far away from that moment that he already knew was the point of no return, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground, as if only there could he find the answers he was looking for. Emily looked up, letting the tears slide down her face without even trying to hold them back, and began to speak in a trembling voice that reverberated in the darkness of the room, confessing that the man she was with was not just someone who attracted her physically, but an old love who had unexpectedly resurfaced in her life months before, someone she had met long before Lucas and who, according to her, had always occupied a space in her heart that he could never fill, someone who, while Lucas believed he was building a solid life with her, insinuated himself through the cracks of her memories like a sweet poison that made her question everything they had built together. Emily's words cut like blades, each sentence revealing that their reunion had not been accidental, but rather the result of exchanged messages, meetings carefully planned since fate, or chance, as she called it, had brought them face to face at an educational conference. Between tremors and broken sighs, she confessed that she had started making fictitious appointments just so she could meet him, that she had invented schedules, colleagues, meetings that never existed so she could spend a few hours with him, that every time she said she was exhausted because of work, she actually came back emotionally devastated because she felt like she was divided between two worlds, unable to give up one and powerless to abandon the other. As she spoke, Lucas could not shake the images of her smile reflected in the restaurant's glass, the way she leaned over the table, the intimacy she shared with another man while he, at home, organized surprises to rekindle a flame that had already been extinguished in his heart. At the height of his despair, he shouted that he didn't understand why she hadn't left him before, why drag a marriage into such a cruel theater, but Emily interrupted him with a choked voice, saying that she needed him, that she had always needed him, but that the reunion had awakened something so intense in her that it was impossible to control, that she hadn't planned to fall in love with that man from the past again, but that when she met him again, everything she thought was buried, reignited like embers in dry straw. The words sounded like hammer blows to Lucas, destroying every good memory she had fought to save, and the pain etched on his face made Emily collapse, throwing herself to her knees on the floor as she begged him to forgive her, to forget everything, to start over, but he just watched, paralyzed by the revelation that echoed like a final sentence. All the love she believed unshakable was never enough to fill the void that another man had left in her soul. As she sobbed, he confessed that for years he had tried to convince her to meet him again, but that she had resisted until she could no longer bear it, that the lukewarm routine of their marriage, the silences that had grown longer between them, the lack of surprises and the predictability of their daily lives had opened up gaps that their former love knew how to exploit perfectly. Each of her words was like acid on the still open wounds, and Lucas felt his stomach churn as he remembered the times he thought he was going crazy, the nights he blamed himself for not being interesting enough, the early mornings he would make coffee for her while she was, in fact, dreaming about another man. Emily then revealed that she had not only relived with him the feelings she thought she had forgotten, but also shared with him details of their marriage, the difficulties, the insecurities that Lucas never knew she had, betraying not only her body, but her intimacy, transforming every confidence they shared in bed into ammunition for the one who had always been waiting for her on the other side of life. The air in the room seemed too heavy to breathe, the words reverberated like thunder in Lucas's head, and with each new sentence he felt smaller, more lost, more convinced that he had become an extra in his own story, while another man occupied the role of protagonist in her heart. Emily's voice trembled as she begged for understanding, saying that she didn't want to give him up, but that she could no longer deny that her heart was divided, that she felt torn between the stability of the love they had built and the intensity of the love she had never been able to forget. Lucas staggered, leaning on the dresser to keep from falling, feeling his legs weaken as if they could no longer support the weight of everything he was discovering, as if the ground was about to give way beneath his feet. He then approached her, lifting her by her arms so she stood up, looking into her eyes with a mixture of pain, anger and compassion, asking in a low voice if she really believed they could continue after everything she had done, if she still had hope of rebuilding something on the rubble she herself had caused. Emily, with swollen eyes, murmured that she needed him, that she never imagined they would get this far, that the other man had abandoned her as soon as he realized she would not let go of Lucas, that all that was left for her was to go back home and try to be forgiven, but he walked away, laughing bitterly, realizing that he had been nothing more than a second option for someone who claimed to love him, a safe haven where she ran only when everything went wrong on the other side. Anger took over him, but it wasn't an explosive fury, but rather a sepulchral silence that enveloped the room as Lucas walked towards the door, grabbing his keys from the dresser, his wallet and a coat, without looking back, even when he heard Emily scream his name repeatedly, running towards him, grabbing his arm tightly as if she could stop him from leaving, but he pulled away calmly, looking into her eyes for the last time before saying in a firm tone that the love he felt for her died that night, that the trust that sustained everything collapsed with each word that came out of his mouth, that there was no going back, only the emptiness of a future they would no longer share. Her tears intensified as the sound of the door closing behind him like the echo of a definitive goodbye. The silence of the early morning seemed to scream as Lucas got into the car, started the engine with hands that were still shaking and drove off through the empty streets, feeling his chest crushed by a mixture of relief and devastation, as if each kilometer traveled was a step towards freedom and, at the same time, a reminder of how much he had been deceived. As he drove, flashes of her smile, of the kisses, of the plans, of the dreams they had built together passed through his mind like a distorted film, and for the first time he felt that the only way to stay alive was to not look back, because behind him was everything that had destroyed him, everything that had made him doubt his own worth. He finally understood that the most painful secret was not the betrayal itself, but knowing that it had never been enough to heal the wound she carried from the past, that the greatest rival to her love had always been the shadow of a man she had never forgotten, and that even though he had given everything he had, he would never be able to compete with the memories she had chosen to keep alive. Lucas drove aimlessly until he noticed that the light of dawn was beginning to tint the roofs of the still sleeping houses gray, and only then did he stop at an empty gas station, where he parked the car near a deactivated pump and turned off the engine, letting himself fall into the seat with his head resting on the steering wheel, while he tried to make sense of everything he had just experienced. His mind was spinning with thoughts that were overlapping one another, each word Emily had said still echoed with cruel clarity, each revelation throbbed like an open wound, but there was a strange feeling of liberation growing deep in his chest, as if the pain, however unbearable it was, had finally brought the truth he needed to take the next step. As the sun timidly appeared on the horizon, Lucas realized that the day was dawning on a different world from the one he had known for so many years, the world where the woman he loved was not who he thought, where each smile and each promise hid cracks that now exposed his fragility. He picked up his phone, hesitating before unlocking the screen, and found dozens of missed calls and messages from Emily that ranged from desperate pleas to confusing justifications, as if she were trying to erase the previous night with hastily typed words. He read each sentence, absorbing the tone of fear and regret that overflowed in each line, but when he reached the end, he deleted everything at once, as if sweeping the dust off something he no longer wanted to see. Resolved, he called an old friend he hadn't seen in a long time, someone who had always said that his door would be open for anything, and arranged to spend a few days at his house while he organized his thoughts. He needed distance, he needed silence, he needed a place where he could collect the fragments of himself without the constant threat of Emily begging for one more chance. When he arrived at his friend's house, he was greeted with a strong hug that, more than words, made him feel that he was not alone in the world. The aroma of fresh coffee that filled the room brought to mind memories of simpler days, when worries were limited to bills and deadlines, not betrayals that destroyed dreams. They spoke little in the first few hours, because Lucas was exhausted, his voice too dry to describe the storm he had been through, but his eyes said it all. Each time they were lost in the void, they revealed the pain that still throbbed like an exposed wound. Sitting on the couch, Lucas watched his friend come and go as he tried to make the house seem welcoming, making toast, placing blankets within reach, exchanging words of encouragement with smiles that, even when restrained, conveyed understanding. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was low, but full of sincerity, recounting in detail everything that had happened, the discoveries, the cutting conversation, the moment when reality imposed itself like a definitive blow. As he spoke, he felt the weight of the pain ease a little, as if sharing the pain was the first step in a healing process that would still take time. His friend listened in silence, only squeezing his shoulder every now and then, as if to remind him that he didn't have to face this alone. When Lucas finished, his friend suggested that he take a shower and rest in one of the rooms, assuring him that he could stay as long as he needed. He climbed the stairs carrying his suitcase with heavy steps, as if each step was a memory that needed to be left behind, and when he reached his room, he dropped everything on the floor before collapsing on the bed, where he cried silently until he fell asleep. His sleep was light and restless, populated by confused dreams in which Emily's voice mingled with faceless shadows, whispering lies and vows of love that now sounded hollow, until he woke up in the middle of the afternoon, enveloped in a suffocating heat that seemed to make the air even heavier. When he went down to the kitchen, he found his friend preparing a simple lunch and was greeted with a smile that, for a moment, reminded him that life went on, even when everything seemed to have fallen apart. They ate in silence, interrupted only by the sound of cutlery and the soft hiss of the wind against the windows. After the meal, Lucas received a visit from a lawyer recommended by his friend, a professional who, with a calm voice and firm posture, explained all the procedures he would need to follow to initiate the divorce and protect his assets, guiding him through each document, each step necessary to formalize what his heart had already decided. The lawyer's objective tone helped to organize the mental confusion that Lucas felt, as if bureaucracy offered some control in the midst of the emotional chaos that consumed him. As the days passed, Emily continued to send him messages that varied between declarations of love and veiled threats that she would never leave him alone, each notification arousing in him a mixture of disgust and pity, because he saw in those words the desperation of someone who knew she had destroyed everything. One rainy afternoon, he decided to meet her for the last time, in a discreet café, to definitively put an end to any possibility of reconciliation. When he arrived, he found Emily already sitting down, with swollen eyes and a haggard face, her restless hands holding the cup as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. He sat down without smiling, and for a moment, the silence that hung between them seemed as dense as the heavy clouds that darkened the sky outside. Emily was the first to speak, her voice breaking as she said that she couldn't accept the idea of losing him, that life without him seemed like an unbearable abyss, that she would do anything to reverse what had happened. Lucas interrupted her, with the calm that only someone who had lost everything could have, explaining that there was no going back, that he could not continue to be with someone who made him question his own worth, that trust was like broken glass, impossible to rebuild without scars. Emily cried openly, attracting discreet glances from other customers, but she didn't care, gripping his hand tightly as she begged for one more chance, saying that her heart belonged to him, that she only realized how much she loved him when she found herself alone and despised by the man from her past who made her destroy everything. Lucas pulled his hand away, looking away at the rain running down the cafe windows, and then spoke with a firm but sad voice, that he could no longer carry the weight of trying to fix something that was born to break, that she deserved a whole love, not crumbs from someone who used her heart as a refuge only when the other rejected her. Emily stood up, walking around the table as if looking for a way to touch him again, and insisted that she could change, that she could go to therapy, that they would rebuild everything together, but Lucas just shook his head, standing up too, adjusting his coat on his shoulders before saying that the decision was made, that their lives would go their separate ways from now on. Her voice rose when she realized he was leaving, calling her name through his tears, but he didn't turn around. He walked through the door of the cafe feeling the cold rain falling on his face as if washing away the last remnants of the love that had once kept him blind. As he walked along the soaked sidewalk, each step seemed lighter, as if, with each meter, he was abandoning the chains that bound him to the past. In the following days, Lucas immersed himself in work and projects he had always put off, seeking refuge in activities that occupied his mind and distracted his heart. He rediscovered forgotten hobbies, met old friends who reminded him of who he was before he was just one half of a couple, reconnected with his family, who welcomed him without judgment, offering shoulders, words of strength and sincere smiles that helped heal the open wounds. Between casual encounters, long conversations and short trips to nearby cities, he began to realize that life could have color again, that happiness could spring from new paths, that self-love, once rescued, could be more powerful than any toxic passion. One night, at a charity event organized by work colleagues, he met Sophia, a woman with a bright smile and curious eyes, who approached him to compliment the way he had talked about the social project he was helping to coordinate. The conversation flowed naturally, as if the words fit together perfectly, and Lucas was surprised to feel his heart warm with the lightness of that encounter, something he had not experienced in a long time. They spent hours talking about music, travel, books, exchanging confidences that seemed comfortable, as if they both knew they were in the presence of someone who also carried scars, but who had chosen not to become hostage to them. At the end of that night, they exchanged phone numbers, and Lucas went home with the strange feeling that perhaps love, when true, does not hurt, does not suffocate, does not require one to annul oneself to fit into the other's life. Meanwhile, Emily continued to live in the same house, which now echoed the emptiness of her choices, each room reminding her of the promises she had not kept, each photograph hanging on the wall becoming a silent witness to her downfall. Friends had moved away, tired of listening to her lamentations without action, and the man who had made her betray had completely disappeared, as if he had never existed, leaving her alone with the weight of her mistakes and the memories of a happiness that she herself had destroyed. Every dawn, she wrote messages that she never sent, rereading them until she memorized every word of regret, but aware that time would not come back and that Lucas, now, belonged to a future that did not include her. Thus, the days followed their relentless course, bringing new challenges and small victories for Lucas, who learned to smile again without feeling guilty, while Emily, on the other side of the silence, understood too late that she had lost not only the man who loved her, but the chance to be truly happy, because by searching in the shadows of the past for what she thought was passion, she forgot that the present is the only place where a love that lasts is built. The days that followed that last meeting with Emily became a period of intense introspection for Lucas, who discovered with each dawn the need to reinvent himself, as if his life were a blank page waiting to be written again, without the marks of the past that imprisoned him in painful memories. He began to wake up early, even when sleep insisted on taking him to confusing nightmares, and he walked through quiet streets, watching the sunrise with a gaze that sought answers in the silence of the morning. With each step he took, he felt as if he were leaving behind a fragment of the man he had been, of the husband he believed was enough to maintain a love that could not resist the weight of its own lies. Upon returning home, he found in the solitude of the small temporary apartment a space for reflection where he could finally see how much he had molded himself to please someone who, deep down, never loved him as he said, understanding that, instead of guilt, he needed to nurture respect for himself, because the betrayal was not a consequence of his failures, but of the choice of someone who did not know how to value what they had. With each call he received from friends and family, Lucas realized how important it was to allow himself to be supported, something he had always avoided for fear of appearing weak. Nighttime conversations with his mother, who would spend hours on the phone reminiscing about childhood stories, helped him remember who he was before he built a life around someone who didn't deserve his love. Meanwhile, at work, people began to notice a different sparkle in his eyes, as if the pain that had enveloped him had been transformed into strength, bringing a serenity that did not come from resignation, but from the courage to move forward. Lucas was invited to lead important projects, and for the first time in months, he felt motivated to delve into challenges that would help him grow, because by occupying his mind, he found relief for his heart. Emily, on the other hand, experienced the cruel loneliness that had been imposed on her life as an inevitable consequence of the choices she had made. The messages she wrote at night became longer and more anguished, full of confessions that never reached their intended recipient, while the echo of her own mistakes resounded in every corner of the house she had once shared with Lucas. She began to wander through the rooms in search of some trace of him, rummaging through drawers, smelling the perfume that still lingered on his forgotten clothes, rereading birthday cards that had once made her smile and that now served as implacable mirrors of everything she had destroyed. Every solitary meal, every silent weekend, every meeting refused by friends tired of her lamentations, were living reminders that there was no way back. Her days became drawn out, her nights sleepless, as guilt became a constant companion, reminding her at every moment of the abyss she had dug between herself and any chance of happiness. With each failed attempt to contact him, Emily felt her hope fading, but she still couldn't accept that she had lost Lucas forever. On her solitary walks through the places they used to frequent together, she found herself imagining unlikely reunions, as if she could cross paths with him by chance in a coffee shop or a bookstore, fantasies that only increased the emptiness when she realized that, even if that happened, his eyes would never shine for her as they once did. The memory of the day he left her, the firmness in his voice when he said there would be no forgiveness, echoed in her mind like a sentence, eroding her self-esteem and pride. Every time she remembered his hands moving away from hers, his eyes staring at her with pain and disappointment, she felt a regret so deep that it became almost physical, as if an anchor was pulling her into the depths of a sadness that could not be ended. Meanwhile, Lucas continued his rebuilding process, now accompanied by Sophia, who was gradually becoming a constant and enlightening presence in his days. They found themselves taking their time, building something based on sincere dialogues and spontaneous laughter, learning about each other like someone discovering a new language with patience and curiosity. Each encounter with her reminded Lucas that love doesn't have to come with fear, that healthy relationships are made of mutual respect and the freedom to be who you truly are, without having to play a role to please others. The walks in the open air, the coffees shared on lazy mornings and the long conversations during the early hours of the morning helped to heal the wounds he still carried, because Sophia didn't try to replace his past, she just walked by his side, offering affection without pressure. On a sunny Sunday, they decided to take a short trip together to a quiet village in the nearby hills, and it was there, among breathtaking landscapes and roads lined with ancient trees, that Lucas realized how good it was to feel peace again, how his heart could beat without the constant anxiety of waiting for lies or excuses. They laughed so much on that trip that Lucas was sure there was still joy in the world, and when Sophia held his hand during the sunset, he felt whole for the first time in a long time. There was no rush, there were no hasty promises, just the presence of two people who allowed themselves to get to know each other, and that was more valuable than any empty vow of love. While Lucas found new ways to start over, Emily sank deeper and deeper into her own ghosts. In her attempts to get back into her routine, she realized that work no longer offered the refuge it used to, because everything there reminded her of conversations she had had with Lucas, of dreams they shared about the future that would no longer exist. Her productivity dropped, and her colleagues, who had once been close friends, began to discreetly avoid her, tired of her unstable mood and her constantly teary eyes. At night, when she lay in a cold bed, she wondered how she could have exchanged years of true love for moments of empty excitement, how she had failed to see that the only person who truly cared about her was the very person she had hurt the most. The silence of the house, which had once seemed cozy, now swallowed her in dense shadows, and even the walls seemed to accuse her every time she looked at the marks of paintings that Lucas had taken with him when he left. While Emily reviewed her choices in an endless cycle of guilt, Lucas began to reflect on his own journey, realizing that the pain, despite being cruel, was necessary for him to finally learn to put himself first. In his meetings with Sophia, he shared not only his dreams for the future, but also the fears that still haunted him, as if opening up each wound was a way of freeing himself from the past. Sophia listened patiently, never interrupting to minimize his pain, and this acceptance allowed him to feel comfortable being vulnerable, something he had not allowed himself to do for a long time. In the midst of these conversations, he began to realize that forgiving Emily internally, even without any chance of resuming the relationship, was essential for him to be able to move forward without carrying unnecessary burdens. This process of acceptance was not without its dilemmas. Lucas constantly questioned himself if he had been too harsh in refusing to listen to her once more, if he could have done something differently to prevent them from reaching that point, if by leaving Emily behind he was not also abandoning a part of himself. These doubts stayed with him for days, but each time he remembered the anguish he felt when he saw her with another man, the pain served as a reminder that moving on was the only possible choice. Sophia, noticing the moments when he was lost in these thoughts, would simply squeeze his hand, as if to say without words that she understood his scars and that she would be there even when they hurt. Little by little, Lucas began to feel lighter, as if, instead of surviving each day, he was finally beginning to live it, seeing beauty in details that had previously gone unnoticed. The song of a bird in the morning, the taste of a hot coffee drunk in silence, the smiles of strangers on the streets. Each new experience felt like a victory over the darkness that had enveloped him, and even though there were still moments of sadness, they became less frequent and easier to face. The connection with Sophia grew naturally, without forcing intimacy, but also without avoiding depth, and this gave Lucas the certainty that he was building something different, something that did not need lies to sustain itself. Meanwhile, Emily continued to feel regret, but she couldn't find the strength to start over, because her shame prevented her from seeking help, and her wounded pride kept her stuck in a routine that no longer made sense. She tried to take up old hobbies to distract herself, but everything reminded her of Lucas. The music they listened to together sounded like laments, the movies they watched side by side seemed to mock her loneliness, and even the recipes she used to prepare for him now tasted empty. Conversations with family members became sparse, because she couldn't bear to admit the extent of her mistakes, and the few friendships she had left were frayed by the way she insisted on clinging to the past, unable to accept the reality she had helped build. Thus, while Lucas was reborn, Emily was sinking, and the contrast between their two journeys highlighted how choices made in moments of weakness can define entire destinies. The moral dilemma that emerged from that story was clear: to what extent is repentance enough to repair the harm done? Is there a way for someone who has betrayed to regain the trust of the one they have betrayed? And, above all, is it possible for someone to move on without forgiving themselves? These questions hung like clouds over both of them, each dealing in their own way with the inevitable consequences of decisions that could never be undone. Lucas began to feel that he needed to go beyond the comfortable environment he had built with Sophia and his close friends, because although the new experiences brought joy, a part of him still remained inert, as if waiting for an answer to the question that echoed silently in his chest: why did all of this happen to him? He then decided to return to activities that he had always dreamed of doing, but had put off for fear of displeasing Emily or because he felt trapped in a routine that didn't allow him space for himself. He signed up for an intensive photography course and bought the camera that he had admired in shop windows for years, dedicating himself to capturing details that he had not noticed before: the reflection of light in rain puddles, the spontaneous smiles of children running in parks, the contrast between the shadows of trees and the historic buildings that he always hurried past. Each click seemed to immortalize not only images, but also the feeling of freedom that was beginning to pulse through his veins. On one of those afternoons spent exploring the city, Lucas went into a charming cafe in the old town, a place decorated with rustic furniture and hanging plants that seemed to hang from the ceiling like green curtains. He ordered a cappuccino and sat down at a table in the back, opening a notebook where he began to scribble down ideas and loose thoughts that appeared like flashes of lucidity between memories that still insisted on hurting. It was there, surrounded by the aroma of fresh coffee and the soft sound of a saxophone playing in the background, that he decided he needed to talk to Emily one more time, not to get back together, but to seek definitive closure that would set him free completely. He sent a brief and polite message, suggesting a meeting at a park they used to frequent, and turned off his cell phone, determined not to get hung up on the immediate response. It took Emily hours to respond, and when she did, she accepted the invitation with a mixture of relief and fear, because she knew that this conversation could be her last chance to at least cleanse some of the hurt she had caused. On the agreed day, the weather was gray and humid, as if the sky reflected the density of what was to come. Lucas arrived first, walking between the trees that still held yellow autumn leaves, and sat on a wooden bench that creaked slightly whenever he shifted position. When he saw her approaching, he felt a tightness in his chest, but he stood firm, watching her walk hesitantly, her eyes red and her hands busy holding a scarf that she clutched too tightly. They exchanged cold greetings, as if they were both afraid of what each word could trigger, until Lucas, with a deep sigh, began the conversation by saying that he didn't intend to get back together, but he needed to understand why she had allowed things to get so far without even trying to talk to him, without making room for them, together, to face what was eating away at her insides. Emily took a while to respond, looking away at the nearby lake where ducks swam slowly, as if their tranquility mocked her, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low and broken, confessing that, at many times, she wanted to ask for help, but she was afraid of seeming ungrateful for wanting something beyond the comfortable life they had, afraid that he would feel inadequate, afraid of admitting to herself that she had never been able to bury the past. Each word she said sounded like a belated lament, while tears flowed uncontrollably. Lucas kept his gaze fixed on her, fighting the mixture of compassion and revolt that rose in his chest, and said that if she had trusted him, if she had shown her weaknesses instead of hiding them in other people's arms, they could have tried to rebuild something, but that silence and lies destroyed any possibility. Emily then approached hesitantly, sitting next to him on the bench, without touching him, but close enough to feel the warmth of his presence that she missed so much, and confessed that not only was she afraid of disappointing him, but also that, in her vanity, she liked the feeling of being desired again by someone who represented a part of her youth, as if by reliving those forbidden encounters she could feel alive and special. The confession was like a thin blade for Lucas, because it made it clear that the betrayal was not just a momentary deviation, but rather the result of conscious choices that hurt not only him, but everything they had built. At that moment, a cold wind blew between them, shaking the leaves and bringing a silence full of meaning, until Emily, with a choked voice, said that she did not expect forgiveness, but that she needed to apologize while looking into her eyes, because only then could she, one day, try to forgive herself. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling his heart tighten, but he calmly replied that he forgave her, not because what she did was justifiable, but because he no longer wanted to carry hatred or resentment. He did not want her weight to continue imprisoning his present and his future. He said that, from that moment on, their lives would follow opposite paths, and that he wished with all his heart that she would find a way to find herself again, because there was no longer room for her in his plans. Emily burst into tears, covering her face with her hands, while Lucas stood up, breathing the cold air that filled his lungs with freedom. Before walking away, Lucas looked back and, in a firm voice, said that he would never forget the happy moments they had shared, but that they had been destroyed by what came after, and that their story, despite everything, had taught him to never accept less than he deserved. He walked through the park with determined steps, his legs feeling lighter than they had in a long time, and as he walked away, the painful memories seemed to be left behind like footprints erased by the breeze. Emily remained sitting on the bench, sobbing silently, holding the handkerchief that had become soaked, with the feeling that the world was collapsing around her. In the following days, Lucas returned to his routine of courses and projects, but now with a clarity he had not had before. He felt complete, because the conversation with Emily had closed a wound that insisted on bleeding. Sophia noticed the change in him, the way he smiled more lightly, how his eyes no longer carried the weight of unanswered questions, and one Saturday night, as they walked side by side on a street lit by old streetlights, she asked if he was still afraid of loving again. Lucas looked at her calmly, replying that the fear had not completely disappeared, but that he had learned that love is only worthwhile when both are willing to face their shadows together, that there is no relationship without risks, but that trust needs to be reciprocal, built every day. Sophia smiled, squeezing his hand affectionately, and said that, when he was ready, she would be there, without rushing, to build something beautiful the way they deserved. Meanwhile, Emily struggled to reorganize the fragments of her life. She sought professional help to deal with her deepening depression, began writing in a diary to try to understand the reasons for her choices, and began visiting places that reminded her of who she was before everything went wrong, in the hope of finding something in herself worth saving. One lonely afternoon, she decided to visit the church where they were married, entering silently and sitting on one of the back benches, where she remained for hours reflecting on the promises she had made and not kept, on how the happiness she had sought so much in the arms of another man was, in fact, within herself, but which she had failed to cultivate when she had the chance. Lucas, in turn, dedicated himself to participating in volunteer events, offering his time and skills to help people in difficult situations, and in each look of gratitude he received, he felt that his story, as painful as it had been, now enabled him to be more empathetic, stronger, more human. He realized that the scars he carried did not need to be a reason for shame, but rather reminders that he survived, that he was able to get back on his feet, and that life, despite everything, could be generous to those who chose to live with courage. Between meetings with old friends, walks with Sophia and nights when he allowed himself to dream again, Lucas understood that true love does not require perfection, but rather commitment, dialogue and respect. Each step he took reaffirmed that he would never accept less than he deserved, and that, by rebuilding his own story, he became capable of building a new one, this time more conscious, lighter, more fair to his feelings. And so, while Emily faced her ghosts and Lucas rediscovered the joy of living, their story continued towards destinies that, although separate, transformed them profoundly, preparing them for a future that could finally be written without the chains of the past. Time passed as if it wanted to speed up the healing of wounds that seemed eternal, and in a few months, Lucas's life took on a rhythm that he himself did not believe was possible after everything he had been through. He moved into a sunny apartment with huge windows that let the light flood into every corner, decorating it with photographs he took on walks to new places, immortalizing moments that reminded him of the beauty that still existed in the world. His days began to be filled with work, meetings with Sophia and meetings with himself, because he learned that solitude, when embraced, could be a place of reunion, not despair. On silent nights, he liked to cook recipes that he had always wanted to try, and, at the end, he savored each bite as a celebration of the autonomy he had regained, toasting to the soft sound of songs that, in other times, would have made him cry, but that now sounded like hymns of victory over the pain that almost destroyed him. Sophia had become an essential part of his routine, but without pressure or hasty promises. They shared confidences, laughed at silly jokes, exchanged advice about life and, together, explored new experiences that made both of their eyes shine. There was a complicity between them that was born of mutual respect for the wounds they carried and the patience to allow time to heal each one of them. One afternoon when they were walking through an art festival, Sophia took Lucas's hand, looked into his eyes and said in a firm voice that she admired him deeply for having been able to get back on his feet, and in that moment, he knew that, even if the future was uncertain, he would never accept anything less than that, a true love, one that supports and strengthens, not destroys. While Lucas flourished, Emily faced the dark blossoming of everything she had sown. After being temporarily removed from work due to anxiety attacks that prevented her from maintaining discipline in the classroom, she began to live an increasingly isolated life, refusing visitors, turning off her phone for days, and avoiding places that could bring back painful memories. She tried to reconnect with old friends, but many people distanced themselves because they could no longer bear the toxicity that had settled into her life, and even family members limited themselves to quick, formal conversations, as they felt that any word could trigger endless outbursts. In the early hours of the morning, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how everything that seemed so solid had crumbled, how the man who loved her unconditionally had become nothing more than a ghost who visited her dreams to remind her of what she had lost. The house where she lived became a symbol of emotional ruin, dishes piled up in the sink, plants dried in pots, and clothes piled up on chairs that replaced organized closets, while each room seemed to echo with laughter that no longer existed. In the heavy silence of rainy afternoons, Emily walked through the hallways remembering the moments when she waited for Lucas to arrive for dinner, the nights when they lay hugging each other, the promises whispered under warm blankets. And, with each memory, the certainty that she would never experience anything like that again became so suffocating that it made her wish she could go back in time, undo every choice that led her to that outcome, but knowing that no regrets could reverse what had been destroyed. Meanwhile, Lucas was invited to exhibit his photographs at a small gallery that featured amateur artists, and the event was so well received that local journalists wanted to interview him about his story and how he transformed pain into art. In each interview, he spoke calmly about the power we have to rebuild ourselves even when we think our lives are over, inspiring others who, like him, have felt broken by betrayal or profound loss. The messages he received from strangers thanking him for his words became fuel to keep going, and the realization that his story could help others rise up gave him a sense of purpose he never imagined he would feel. Emily, in turn, faced the consequences of a heart that could not forgive itself. When she saw on social media that Lucas was moving forward, smiling alongside Sophia, visiting new places and making dreams come true, she felt a mixture of envy and guilt so intense that it paralyzed her, making it harder and harder to get out of bed and fight to live each day. One cold morning, she decided to seek help in support groups for people who were facing depression, but even sitting in circles where others shared pain as deep as hers, she felt that she was different, because she carried the awareness of having been the cause of her own abyss, and this made everything even heavier. The moral dilemma surrounding Emily became more evident when she began to reflect on the nature of forgiveness. Was it possible to truly forgive oneself when one had destroyed someone one loved? Was there redemption for someone who had betrayed not only the trust of another, but also one's very essence? With each therapy session, she felt the answer move further away, as the pain she had caused became impossible to ignore, and the echoes of the happy days she had wasted resonated like torturous memories. Meanwhile, Lucas understood that, although the hurt he felt was devastating, forgiving Emily internally freed him to live a lighter life, as carrying resentment would be like continuing to be trapped in a story that was no longer his. Months later, at a casual meeting with mutual friends, Lucas and Emily saw each other again, and the reunion, although brief, was full of symbolism. She, visibly shaken, tried to maintain a smile that didn't reach her eyes, while he, with an upright posture and calm gaze, showed respect without any trace of a desire to return to what was gone. They exchanged polite words about the weather and life, but the silence that settled between them said more than any conversation. There was no longer a connection, only the irreversible distance that betrayal had created. After the event, Lucas walked home feeling relieved to realize that he was truly free from the past, while Emily, sitting alone on a bench, understood that this was the last chance to see him up close before he disappeared from her life for good. On the night that Lucas completed 1 year since he left home for the last time, he and Sophia organized a special dinner to celebrate not only the date, but everything they had learned together. Amid candles, soft music and looks that said more than words, they toasted to a future built on honesty and mutual support, laughing at little stories that made the moment even lighter. Lucas was moved to realize that, even without planning it, he had found true love, but this time, it was based on truth, understanding, and the daily choice to stay by each other's side. That dinner, simple in details, marked the beginning of a new phase, in which hope was no longer a distant dream, but part of the present that was becoming increasingly solid. Emily, in turn, began living in a smaller apartment, needing to start over from scratch in every sense, emotionally, financially and socially. Seeking to find meaning in days that seemed empty, she began writing letters to herself as a form of therapy, confessing her regrets, her desires to go back, and with each letter, she felt a little more aware that she might never be able to forgive herself completely. The nights continued to be long and the days difficult, but each dawn represented a new chance to try to be someone better, even if the past remained as a scar that would never disappear. And so, the story of a marriage that seemed perfect ended like so many others that are lost due to a lack of dialogue, empathy, and the courage to face difficulties together. Lucas discovered in his pain the strength to rebuild himself, finding a true love that was born of respect and patience, while Emily faced loneliness as a consequence of choices that could not be undone, learning, too late, that betrayal does not only destroy relationships, but also the person who betrays. This story shows how infidelity corrodes bonds, extinguishes dreams and drives away people who could have been happy if they had chosen loyalty. If you've made it this far, comment on what you thought of this story and share your opinion. We'd love to hear what you think. Subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. Remember, betrayal destroys families, friendships, and entire lives. Here on our channel, we do not support any type of betrayal, because we believe that true love can only exist where there is respect and trust.